All right, welcome back to Chapter 6, Video 6. In this video, we're going to have a look at how to pass multiple arguments and named arguments, default arguments, all sorts of different types of arguments that can be passed inside. Now, in this example here, this is when we click a show button, we can actually pass more than just one argument into a method. So we've got here set up a show the maximum number in the method. Now this is kind of a neat method because it's similar to something like Microsoft Excel, where you got show the maximum and you've got 5 and you've got 10. You want to find out which one is the larger or the smaller of the two. Now to do that, we need to have both arguments passed into the method so we can check that out. So as soon as I do that, it's going to call the method. Now it says here show the max. It's going to call the method here called show the max, and 5 is been set up as an integer. It's going to be passed as an integer, so that's good. And we're also going to pass in 10. So we can pass in multiple arguments into a user method, a method that you guys code yourself. And inside of these two brackets here, we could write a decision structure, say if num1 is greater than num2, then num2 is the larger number. Right, we could write the code. That's really not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show that we can pass multiple arguments. And what we're doing here, in a sense, is we're actually writing our own custom methods. It's like writing our own custom functions in something like Microsoft Excel, where it would be like, what's the maximum number? And we could put in multiple arguments, and we could also do all sorts of things in here to pass it into a custom method. All right, let's have a look at named arguments. Named arguments are simply passing arguments into a method, into the method's parameters, and putting a label, in a sense, a name to that argument. So in an example up here, if I was to click the show button and I activate my method that I've got here called show the name, I can pass Smith and I could pass Susan. But when you're passing arguments, is it first name or last name, first name? But by putting in a name right here, so I'm going to call it last name. I'm using a camel case naming convention and a colon. That whole thing right here gets tagged, and that's one argument within inside of this method right here. And Smith gets tagged as last name. Similarly with Susan gets tagged as first name with that colon right there. So what happens is when I run that, it gets passed in. So this is Smith is obviously a string. That's the argument. It gets passed into the parameter here called first name, and it's been declared as a string. And Susan gets, Smith gets entered into here as last name, so it's almost going crisscross, and we do that because it helps organize how the parameters can be laid out. So therefore in the future I can just type in Susan, because that's the first name, and then Smith, which is the last name, and then I can get it to do whatever message box or whatever I want to do with that information, whatever statement I need it to do. Oh, it looks like there's a typing mistake there, by the way. All right, so that kind of explains what a named argument is. It's just allowing you, in the case that you've got multiple arguments in your method, you can help identify each one if there happens to be like, for clarity on what the name of those are. All right, let's have a look at the default argument. Now, a default argument is an argument that gets entered into your argument within inside of your method that is constant. So in this case, the tax rate is 7%. It gets entered in here as a second argument. Now, if you're going to use this method in the future, you can just put in one amount, but it has 2 in there automatically to do the calculation. But you can override it. If you don't like the 7%, let's say the tax rate changes, you can always increase it or change it. It will override that method. So if we put it in like this, it comes in as a default value of 7%. It calculates the tax rate at 7%, although we could have just typed in 7.07. But then in the future, we wouldn't be able to override it if we wanted to. And by having that default value there, we don't have to put it in when we're actually writing out our method with our argument. So if I want to find out what the tax rate is on $100, I could type it in like this. It would come back at $7 at 7%, but I could overwrite it. This would come back at $8 in this case. So that's a little example about how the default arguments work in a method.